Chapter 606. The haunted house, on Mount Tianlong that was gradually becoming famous, was located on the side of Fuyunji territory, so it didn't take Lu Chun and Old Ma much time to get there. However, even though Lu Chun was a man with a strong will, he didn't have the perverted hobby of liking bloody scenes. So after the incident here came to an end, he didn't come to the vicinity anymore. Even recalling the scene in that bedroom wasn't a pleasant thing. When they walked outside the haunted house, Lu Chun saw the Fuyunji people guarding around the house. Of course, the number of people was much less than on the night of the murder, but it was enough to stop people with ulterior motives from entering. At this time, the sky was still dark, and the faint light in the distance was slightly brighter. However, the darkness before dawn still seemed to be suppressing the light, making one's heart feel stifled. Seeing Lu Chun and Old Ma walk over, the guards standing at the gate quickly came to welcome them. It seemed like they had already received orders, so they directly let Lu Chun and Old Ma in. They also explained that Hall Master Shui and the others were waiting at the crime scene for young Master Lu's arrival. Lu Chun nodded and walked in with Old Ma. After entering the door of the haunted house, they could clearly feel a sense of coldness. Although the houses and pavilions looked the same as a few days ago, it gave off a lifeless and gloomy feeling. Old Ma couldn't help but frown. He said to Lu Chun in a low voice, "Is there really something strange about this house? It makes people feel a little uncomfortable the moment they enter." Lu Chun glanced at him and said, "Could it be that you're thinking too much?" Old Ma grunted and said, "That's not for sure. After such a terrible thing happened, of course, no one would stay here anymore. Even Chun, he had to find another place for him to settle down. This was to prevent him from feeling sad and causing more trouble. As for the haunted house, it had naturally been thoroughly searched by the people of Fuyunji. Even today, they had called Lu Chun over because Blood Warbler and the others seemed to have made a new discovery. However, just like how time would always pass, memories would always be hard to grasp. No matter how ghastly the bloodstains were, no matter how tragic, it would eventually dry up. The thick and horrifying smell of blood in the air had mostly dissipated, leaving only a little bit of the smell, which still reminded people of that horrible scene. Lu Chun inexplicably felt a burst of irritation in his heart, but he still endured it on his face and did not reveal any emotions. Soon, the two of them walked into the backyard and saw Shuang standing in the middle of the courtyard with her hands behind her back, quietly looking up at the sky. In this dark night before dawn, this beautiful woman looked a bit thinner. Although it didn't reduce her charm and elegance, it made people feel that she was vaguely heart-wrenching at this moment. Perhaps she was going to spend the whole night here? Lu Chun and Old Ma walked over. Hearing the sound of footsteps, Shuang turned around. Her gaze swept across Lu Chun and Old Ma's faces, then she nodded slightly as a greeting. There was a hint of alienation in her politeness. Lu Chun asked, "Hall Master Shui, I heard that something was discovered here?" Shuang grunted and said, "Yes, and they suspect that the thing they discovered is related to the Devil Sect. Because you are very familiar with the Devil Sect, they wanted you to come and take a look. I'm sorry to disturb you so late at night." Lu Chun couldn't tell whether Shui Ying's apology was real or fake, but since she said so, he could only respond, "It's fine, the matter here is more important. Then shall we go and take a look?" Shuang nodded and gestured with her hand, then led the way to the bedroom. Lu Chun looked in that direction and frowned slightly, but he didn't hesitate to follow. Old Ma, on the other hand, stood where he was a little hesitant. But in the end, he sighed and followed the two of them into the bedroom. There were candles and lamplight in the bedroom. It wasn't as dark as it was on the night of the murder, illuminating most of the room. Lu Chun stood at the door and looked around. He could vaguely make out the original layout of this place. It was an ordinary but warm residential room. But now, of course, everything was different. Most of the furniture had fallen to the ground, and even if it wasn't broken, it was stained with blood. Even the floor was covered with dark red stains, big and dirty. The corpses that had once laid here were long gone. Lu Chun suddenly thought of a phrase, "to bury in peace." Unfortunately, his own rationality told him that those poor women and children might not be able to find peace even now. This matter was too big, and the repercussions were too bad. The Floating Clouds office had to investigate this thoroughly. Only then would they be able to give everyone an explanation. More accurately, it was for Shui to give an explanation to Supreme Tianlan. The corpses of those who had died might still be preserved by Fuyunji, stored in some secret place. As for the wishes of those who had died, or even the wishes of the living like Chen He, everyone could comfort and sympathize, but no one would care. Shui walked into the depths of the room and stepped over the shocking bloodstains on the ground. She stood beside the large bed that had already tilted to one side, then waved at Lu Chun. Lu Chun walked over, and Shui pointed at the bed and said in a low voice, "We only found it last night, it's behind there." Lu Chun was startled at first, but then he immediately understood. The subordinates of Fuyunji were used to seeing life and death murders all year round, and they had always been meticulous in their work. After this murder, this haunted house must have been thoroughly searched inside and out. No matter how hidden the corners or how well hidden the secret rooms, they would all be found by these people, and no one would be spared. So before coming here, Lu Chun was a little puzzled as to why there was a fish that had slipped through the net. The secret was only discovered today, and he was called over. But now that he had a look here, he understood. The floor under the bedboard must have been carefully examined by someone. However, it was probably due to the human mind that the back of the bedboard had been overlooked. It seemed like a very simple trick, but it was able to fool those experienced hands. To be able to set up this kind of setup, one must not be underestimated. Old Ma walked over with a lamp. In the light, Lu Chun grabbed the bed and exerted force, flipping the entire bed over. As he flipped it, his hands actually felt a little strained. The weight of the bed was actually quite heavy, indicating that the wood was very thick and good. In the blink of an eye, the board flipped over, and the lamp fell on the back of the board, illuminating everything and showing a circular pattern in front of them. In the middle of the circle, there was a tall, straight tree connecting the top and bottom. The branches in the middle were forked, and each branch had a layer. Each layer had a different pattern carved on it. There were birds and beasts, Shura demons, humans, immortals, and monsters. The rest of the empty spaces were also carved with many things, looking very strange. The room was very quiet. Shui watched as Lu Chun squatted down and carefully examined the pattern. After waiting for a while, she asked Lu Chun in a low voice, "This pattern, is it related to the devil cult?" Lu Chun slowly stood up, then turned to look at Shui. After a moment of silence, his gaze deepened, and he slowly said, "Detain Chen He first." Chapter 607. Why? Shui stood there without moving. Her expression was a little ugly, but she did not show any signs of anger. In fact, even her tone was a little low. She only said calmly, "No matter what, before I act, you have to give me an explanation. This is the Devil Sect's Tree of God diagram. I believe you are not unfamiliar with it." Lu Chun pointed at the diagram on the back of the bed and said, "In the past battles with the Devil Sect, you should have seen some similar diagrams. This is because in the Devil Sect's mythological system, this Tree of God diagram is actually divided into high and low levels. Ordinary disciples draw the lowest level Tree of God diagram, and only the higher-ups of the Devil Sect understand the meaning of the higher-level Tree of God diagram." Lu Chen's finger slowly swept across the branches of the Tree of God. His voice was calm but powerful as he said, "The Devil Sect's imprint that we usually see is the lowest level Tree of God diagram. There is only a towering Tree of God inside. This Tree of God diagram has the meaning of merging the three realms and all living beings. It is an extremely high-level secret in the Devil Sect." He paused, then said, "Almost exactly what someone like Chen He, who is second only to one but above tens of thousands of people, would understand. But why would he draw this in his own home? This is the Zhangxianming headquarters. Is that guy's brain broken?" This time, the one who could not help but ask was not the silent Shui, but old Ma, who was standing at the side. Looking at his stunned face, it was obvious that he could not understand this. Hearing this, Shui also looked at Lu Chun, obviously also a little puzzled. Lu Chun stood up from the ground, his brows slightly furrowed, as if he was a little hesitant, but in the end he nodded and said, "It's like this, some people in the Devil Sect, many people, they are actually very firm in their belief in the Devil Sect's evil path of legend. Chen He is probably such a person." Shui Ying's face looked a little cold as she said, Then why did he betray the devil's sect and rely on us? Lu Chen shook his head and said, No, he did not betray the devil's sect's belief. From the beginning, it was the devil's sect's demons who fell into our trap. Elder Ghost ordered to kill his family, so Chen he had no choice but to rebel. What he betrayed was Elder Ghost, not the evil faction's faith, so most probably after he came to our place, he was still anxious and uneasy in his heart, so he quietly carved this picture of the divine tree. Only when he is accompanied by it day and night, he can fall asleep. Even Shui Ying and Old Ma, these two people who were usually not very close or familiar with each other, involuntarily revealed a startled expression as they exchanged glances. A moment later, Shui Ying suddenly laughed coldly and said, Looks like you really know everything about the devil cult. Of devil sect, you did not waste after staying with them for so many years. Lu Chen lowered his gaze slightly. No one knew what he was feeling at the moment, but he didn't explain anything. He just calmly said, I've said it before. This painting was most likely created by Chen He himself. It's best to capture him first. Does Hallmaster Shui have any objections? As soon as he said this, Shui Ying's expression turned ugly. Just as she was about to say something else, the light in the room suddenly dimmed, and the candles in the room swayed violently. The three people in the room were shocked. They turned around and saw a huge figure standing at the door. He was facing the bedroom and looking at them indifferently. It was true Lord Tianlan. Old Ma was the first to bow, followed by Shui Ying and Lu Chen. True Lord Tianlan slowly walked into the room. His face was calm and indifferent, as if he was not affected by the bloody and mournful aura. He walked to Lu Chen's side and looked at the Tree of God diagram on the wooden board for a while. Then he looked at Shui Ying and asked, Did Lu Chen's words make sense? Shui Ying wanted to say something but hesitated. After a while, she took a light breath and said in a low voice, It makes sense. Chen He is indeed very suspicious. But this subordinate thinks that drawing this Tree of God diagram and killing a family of women and children are two different things. He shouldn't. True Lord Tianlan raised his hand to stop Shui Ying from speaking. He glanced at Lu Chen and said, Do you think Chen He is the real culprit? No. Lu Chen did not hesitate and immediately answered. On the night of the incident, Old Ma and I saw him at the Tingyu Tower. At least according to the time, he was not here. After a pause, Lu Chen said, I didn't say he killed his family. I just feel that this person is still thinking about the devil sect. We can't be careless. It's best to detain him first. True Lord Tianlan nodded indifferently and said to Shui Ying, Did you hear that? Shui Ying looked down and said, Yes. True Lord Tianlan said, Take Chen He first and interrogate him in detail. Shui Ying responded and turned to leave. After she left, True Lord Tianlan did not say anything more, and also turned to walk out of the house. But on the way he said to Lu Chen, You come too. Follow me to the underground city. Lu Chen was startled and immediately understood. It seemed that the strange phenomenon in the underground city that he mentioned to True Lord Tianlan was a very important matter to this person. He needed to go check and deal with it immediately. This bald True Lord seemed to attach great importance to the empty and mysterious underground city. Lu Chen agreed and followed him out of the door. Old Ma was a little hesitant, and did not know whether he should follow them or not. But then he saw Lu Chen wave his hand slightly when he passed by him, indicating that he did not want him to follow. Old Ma was relieved. At the same time, he was a little curious about what happened in the underground city. After the two people left, Old Ma was left alone in the bedroom. Old Ma could not help but walk to the side of the bed and squat down to take a closer look at the picture of the divine tree. This time, after looking at it for a long time, he gradually frowned and revealed a puzzled expression. It seemed that he saw something that he did not quite understand, and was a little puzzled. On the way to the entrance of the underground cave at the foot of the mountain, True Lord Tianlan and Lu Chen walked all the way. To be exact, Lu Chen was always one step behind True Lord Tianlan, walking on his side and behind him. True Lord Tianlan did not say anything about it. After walking for a while and seeing no one around, he suddenly asked Lu Chen, How is White Lotus? After a moment of silence, Lu Chen said, I helped her to recuperate, but she has not woken up yet. I don't know whether she's alive or not. It all depends on her luck. True Lord Tianlon replied with an "oh" and took 2 steps forward, saying, You seem to be soft-hearted recently. Lu Chen raised his head and glanced at his tall silhouette, not saying a word. True Lord Tianlon also did not say anything about it. The master and disciple seemed to have nothing to say, and went down the mountain just like that. However, when they reached the long street, True Lord Tianlon suddenly asked, You said that the picture of the divine tree was only of an extremely high level. Isn't that the highest level of the divine tree in the devil cult? Lu Chen said, Yes. True Lord Tianlon asked, What does the highest level of the divine tree look like? Lu Chen hesitated for a moment and then said, It's a scene of the collapse of the sky and the collapse of the 3 realms. The divine tree runs through the sky, and the devil god descends. All living beings prostrate and unite. Perfected Lord Tianlan's footsteps came to a sudden halt. Chapter 608. Lu Chen saw that Perfected Lord Tianlan stopped, but did not turn around. He just looked into the distance. He looked in the direction of Perfected Lord Tianlan's gaze, and saw that the sun had finally broken through the horizon in the distance. Its warm radiance dyed the sky red, bringing light and hope to the world. It's daybreak, Perfected Lord Tianlan suddenly said. Lu Chen nodded and said, Yes, it's daybreak. Perfected Lord Tianlan stared at the rising sun and said, Do you believe in the words of the devil cult? No. Lu Chen said, If I believed in those nonsense, I wouldn't have done those things in the barren valley. Perfected Lord Tianlan nodded slowly and said, You're right. At that time, the demons of the devil cult were only 1 step away from the true God's descent. So on the matter of the devil cult, even if I don't believe in anyone in the world, I will definitely believe in you. Lu Chen looked at him and Perfected Lord Tianlan turned back, smiled at him, and even patted Lu Chen's shoulder. There were some words that they should understand in their hearts, but they wouldn't say it out loud. For people at this level, in a sense, trust was often more important than ability. No matter what one's background, character, ability, or means, trust was the most difficult thing to obtain. Standing at the peak of the human race, deity stage perfected cultivators had seen through the superficial and fickle human affairs, and the changes of the world. In the bloody battles with the devil cult over the years, mutual deceit and intrigue had become commonplace. They, who had to be on guard against the weapon stabbing from behind at all times, were the ones who valued and trusted the most. Perhaps it was because of this that Perfected Lord Tianlan had always regarded Lu Chen with special respect. Only he had always believed that no matter how the world changed, only Lu Chen would always stand with him, and would never conspire with the devil cult. By the way, Supreme Lord Tianlan turned around and continued to walk forward. At the same time he said casually, You've been in the devil cult for so many years. I heard that those evildoers are very good at brainwashing. Why are you still able to stay awake? Lu Chen followed behind him. After a moment of silence he said, You taught me. Perfected Lord Tianlan glanced at him before bursting into laughter. There seemed to be a hint of gratification and joy in his laughter. With the 3 of us here, moving unhindered throughout the world is a small matter. In this world, there is not a single person who can contend against us. Even that bastard Tianlan has no choice but to lower his head. A slightly complacent voice came from the main hall of the Starry Hall. Of course, such rash and bold words could not be heard by too many people. Therefore, at this moment, there were only 3 people sitting in the Starry Hall. They were the 3 famous perfected lords of the divine transformation realm in Zhengxianmeng. They were the master of the Starry Hall, Perfected Guyu, the master of the Heavenly Law Hall, Perfected Taihu, and Perfected Guangbo. The one who was speaking now was Perfected Guangbo. He looked excited and expectant. Obviously, he was very proud of himself for organizing this secret alliance against Perfected Lord Tianlan and the Fuyunji faction. He almost patted his chest and boasted. Compared to Perfected Guangbo's arrogance and complacency, Perfected Guyu and Perfected Tai who looked calmer. Among them, Perfected Guyu pondered for a moment and looked at Perfected Tai Hu. Then he asked, You really can't persuade Perfected Golden Dragon and Perfected Flowing Cloud? Immortal Guangbo's expression froze. Immortal Tiehu, who was sitting beside him, continued, "Yes, I've talked to the two of them in private. Immortal Golden Dragon said that he's old and probably doesn't have much time left, so he doesn't want to be involved in these matters. Immortal Luyan, on the other hand, is trying to comprehend the mystical arts and has been in seclusion for 20 years. He's reached a critical juncture and can't be distracted." Perfected Guyu nodded slowly. Seeing his expression, Perfected Guangbo hurriedly said, "Even so, these two perfected immortals have promised in private that they will restrain their subordinates and never get involved in unnecessary things. In fact, with the strength of the three of us, we have an overwhelming advantage over Fuyunji. As long as they don't play any tricks and don't side with Tianlan, we will definitely win." Perfected Guyu still looked a little worried. He said in a low voice, "Could it be that these two are hesitant and secretly tell this to Tianlan?" Perfected Guangbo frowned and glanced at Perfected Taihu. Perfected Taihu smiled and said confidently, "I can be sure of this. They won't do that. Based on their temperament, they can easily find an excuse to make it hard to distinguish the truth from the lies. But if there is a conflict, they will most likely sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight. After that, we will give them some small benefits and they will naturally leave." Perfected Guyu clapped his hands and said with a smile, "Brother Taihu is indeed astute. Everything is under control. Since this is the case, let's do it." Taihu smiled and Perfected Guangbo was very happy. He clapped his hands and said, "That's right. When the time comes, we will get rid of those ambitious people and clear up the universe. When the righteous return to peace, it will be a blessing for all people. A blessing for all people." Perfected Guyu silently repeated these words in his heart. He was a little speechless, but he did not show it on his face. He still smiled and applauded Perfected Guangbo's bold words. Then, as if he suddenly thought of something, he frowned and said, "Speaking of which, since we are going to do such a big thing, we should have a name. Since we are an alliance, we should also have a person to take charge of the overall situation, give orders and judge the situation. Only then can we unify the command and achieve great things." As soon as he said this, Perfected Taihu and Perfected Guangbo nodded in agreement, but neither of them said anything after that. Guyu True Monarch frowned, and after a while said to the two, "I think this alliance can be called Heaven Breaker. As for the responsibility of being the leader, I am willing to be your assistant, and run errands everywhere. I will not shirk." "Very good, very good. Brother Guyu deserves it, you deserve it." The two people opposite him nodded and looked at each other with a smile. But other than that, no one was willing to say a word more. But the meaning in the silence seemed to be obvious. "Choose me. Choose me." These two words seemed to have been engraved in their eyes and written on their faces. Everyone knew that once they were in charge, they would have great power in their hands. The most important thing was that when it was time to divide the profits after the matter was completed, they would definitely get the biggest share. Wasn't this the reason why everyone fought with their lives and even fell out with that madman Tianlan for the sake of justice in the world? Justice and justice? What was that? Could it be eaten? Could it feed so many people under them? The two looked at Perfected Guyu with smiles on their faces. Obviously, they were waiting for Perfected Guyu to continue speaking and say that name. Even though Perfected Guyu's cultivation was profound, his willpower was firm, and he was mentally prepared, but at this moment, being looked at like this by the two people, he felt his heart numb. After all, they were both spirit-severing perfected cultivators. The consequences of getting angry. Even people of the same level would be afraid of it. He took a deep breath and thought for a while. Then he showed a trace of embarrassment on his face. After a while, he took a deep breath and said, "In my opinion, the position of the main leader must belong to Brother Taihu." Crack! A crisp sound was heard. It was the teacup in Perfected Guangbo's hand that exploded and turned into powder. Chapter 609. The main hall of the Starry Hall was large and spacious. Now that there were only 3 of them, of course, it would not be very lively. Therefore, the sound of the teacup being crushed sounded particularly loud and clear. Even the guards outside the main hall, who were separated by a closed door, were startled and turned to look in this direction. In the main hall, Immortal Guangbo looked a little gloomy. The spilled tea stained his hands and slowly dripped down, but he did not care. As for the other two people sitting at the side, Immortal Tiehu seemed to have suddenly become deaf and did not hear anything. He calmly picked up his teacup and took a sip of tea. As for Immortal Guyu, he had a bitter smile on his face and sighed. Although he had already made up his mind, and although he had expected this situation in advance, when faced with the anger of a Huashan perfected cultivator, even if he was not weaker than the other party, the pressure was still very heavy. In this world, no one knew better than the Huashan perfected cultivator how terrifying a great cultivator who had cultivated to this level was. However, when Immortal Guyu thought of this helplessly, he suddenly felt a jolt in his heart and became absent-minded for a moment. It had been many years since a great cultivator who had cultivated to the Huashan realm was killed. Huashan perfected cultivators were known to be extremely difficult to kill. Even old and weak Huashan perfected cultivators could not be underestimated. Therefore, for many years, almost no one had thought of killing a Huashan perfected cultivator, let alone taking action. In that case, when on earth did Tianlan have such a thought in his mind? Immortal Guyu suddenly thought of Hakushin Jinkuan of the Kunlun party, who suddenly passed away a few years ago. For a 1,000-year-old sect like the Kunlun party, some things were destined to be hidden forever, and outsiders would never know the truth. However, perfected Lord Guyu quickly recalled the scene at that time. He remembered very clearly that at that time, perfected Lord Tianlan had left Xingxianmeng ahead of time, and returned to Kunlun Mountain. After that, there were several news channels that there was an intense change in the depths of Kunlun Mountain. Even one of the most famous four great peaks in the sky and clouds had been destroyed. That was the winter peak where Hakushin Jinkuan's cave was located. All these thoughts flashed through Guyu's mind in an instant. He thought about everything that had happened and felt a slight chill in his heart. However, after a short while, he temporarily suppressed those distracting thoughts, and a smile appeared on his face again as he faced the seemingly thorny problem in front of him. Immortal Guangbo looked very angry, annoyed, and furious. He seemed to be about to explode. If that happened, then all their previous plans would be in vain. Immortal Guyu smiled, stood up, and walked to Immortal Guangbo. He casually handed over a soft silk handkerchief for him to wipe his hands and said with a smile, "Brother Guangbo, you have always been calm and composed. This is not like you usually." Immortal Guangbo snorted, but he did not immediately turn hostile. He took the silk handkerchief and began to wipe his hands. The tense atmosphere suddenly relaxed a lot. Immortal Guyu smiled and took another step forward. At this moment, he had his back to Immortal Tiehu and was facing Guangbo. He reached out to clean up the debris on the table. Immortal Guangbo frowned slightly. Although he was very unhappy now, there was no reason for him to let another perfected cultivator of Huashan realm clean up these things in front of him. In any case, Immortal Guyu was not a servant, but a real perfected cultivator of Huashan realm. If he ignored it, it would be a bit insulting and contemptuous. Thus, Immortal Guangbo could only pout and stop Immortal Guyu. He said in a muffled voice, "Why are you collecting these things? Let someone else do it later." However, halfway through his sentence, Perfected Lord Guangbo suddenly saw Perfected Lord Guyu raise her eyebrows and secretly gave him a meaningful look. Immortal Guangbo's heart skipped a beat, but he still stopped Immortal Guyu. Of course, Immortal Guyu could not really do these things, so he stopped and looked up at Immortal Tiehu. He said, "Brother Tiehu, Brother Guangbo, in my opinion, this matter should be settled. After all, even if we succeed in the future, the three of us will have the final say on how to split the profits. How about we wait until then?" Immortal Tiehu was the first to nod and said with a smile, "That's a good idea. It's settled then." He then looked at Immortal Guangbo. Immortal Guangbo looked unlucky and had a complicated expression on his face. He seemed to be calculating in his heart and finally came to a conclusion. He let out a long sigh and said, "That's settled then." Immortal Tiehu laughed and looked very proud. Immortal Tianlan and Lu Chen walked to the long street under the light of the morning sun. They looked at the Fuyunji guards who were guarding outside the curtains. Among them, Lu Chen saw the leader Lu Ting, whom he had noticed the other day. However, at this time Lu Ting did not seem to have noticed the two big shots who were walking over from the distance. He looked dispirited and seemed to be a different person from when he met Lu Chen. Lu Chen felt a little strange, but then he saw that the morale of the guards around Lu Ting was not high. His heart moved and he could roughly guess the reason. These guards seemed to have been on duty for the whole night, but Lu Chen clearly remembered their expressions when he brought White Lotus out. It was impossible to hide this matter in broad daylight. Now that so much time had passed, it was needless to say that the upper echelons of Fuyunji, especially Xueying, must have known about it. He let White Lotus sneak into the underground, and so many people actually did not notice? This was definitely going to cause trouble, but it had not been dealt with yet. However, with Xueying's methods, she would definitely make Lu Ting and the others suffer. It was no wonder that Lu Ting and the others were frowning. While he was thinking, Immortal Tianlan had already walked close to the entrance of the underground tunnel. The guards at the outermost area were just about to give him a warning and drive him away when their bodies suddenly shook and their eyes widened in disbelief. After a while, they were so frightened that they jumped up and saluted. Lu Ting, who was at the back, had not reacted yet. He was so preoccupied that he did not even look over. He was so anxious that a guard went over and pushed him hard. Lu Ting staggered and almost fell to the ground. He was furious and was about to curse when Tianlan and Lu Chen's figures suddenly appeared in his sight. Lu Ting shuddered and immediately strode forward. However, he stammered as he looked at perfected Lord Tianlan, a big shot who was usually revered like a god, standing there. His body trembled slightly, but he did not know what to say. At this moment Lu Chen, who was standing beside Immortal Tianlan, smiled and said to Immortal Tianlan, "Master, this person is called Lu Ting, a guard captain in Fuyunji. He usually does his work well, but he suffered because of oxen a few days ago." If Lu Chen had only mentioned how Lu Ting was capable, perfected Lord Tianlan would probably have nodded his head at most, and would not have paid any attention to it. However, perfected Lord Tianlan was a little surprised when he suddenly mentioned the green bull. He took another look at Lu Ting and asked, "What's going on?" Lu Chen smiled and said, "That day, oxen suddenly insisted on going down here, and it was difficult for them to guard. You also know oxen's temper, so they suffered a lot. Fortunately, I passed by here later and showed up to take oxen down, otherwise it would have been a lot of trouble." Perfected Lord Tianlan acknowledged and nodded. "Well done." After a pause, he suddenly glanced at Lu Chen and said lightly, "Do a good job in the future. Fuyunji is the fairest place. Those who are capable will definitely be promoted." Lu Ting was overjoyed. His legs turned to jelly and he knelt down. The guards behind him also knelt down and thanked him profusely. Immortal Tianlan did not say much and walked over directly. When Lu Chen followed him, he took a look at Lu Ting and saw that Lu Ting's eyes were filled with gratitude, and he nodded heavily at him. Chapter 6:10. He was not an emperor, but he was better than one. The surrounding people were prostrating before that tall figure with looks of admiration and gratitude on their faces. All of this was because of a simple sentence from perfected Lord Tianlan. He did not even give a solid promise. Just a simple compliment was enough to make these people so agitated. Lu Chen stood beside perfected Lord Tianlan and watched all of this in silence. Then the two of them walked into the underground tunnel. Lu Ting and the other guards followed in fear and trepidation. They did not even dare to speak to perfected Lord Tianlan, and could only ask Lu Chen carefully if he needed their help. Moreover, their faces were filled with anticipation and desire, as if it would be their greatest honor if perfected Lord Tianlan needed their help. It seemed like they were even willing to go through fire and water for him without any hesitation. Lu Chen politely but firmly rejected them. The surrounding guards looked as if it was only natural and agreed repeatedly, respectfully sending the two lords into the underground world. After entering the underground tunnel, the voices behind them disappeared and the surroundings became quiet. Only the footsteps of perfected Lord Tianlan and Lu Chen could be heard. It really felt as if they had suddenly entered another world from the noisy mortal world. After walking for a while, perfected Lord Tianlan suddenly said, "When those people outside were kneeling to us, I noticed that your expression was a little unnatural. What's wrong? Lu Chen was silent for a moment before saying, "This is the first time so many people have knelt before me. Although they are mainly kneeling to you, I still feel a little strange." Perfected Lord Tianlan said, "Did they do this when you were in the fiend cult?" Lu Chen thought for a moment before saying, "Basically not. Occasionally, there will be some master and disciple kneeling to each other. However, the fiend cult does not pay attention to such things, so it's very rare." Perfected Lord Tianlan was silent for a moment before saying, "You should know that I didn't ask them to kneel to me. Those people outside all wanted to kneel on their own, or when someone took the lead, everyone followed suit." Lu Chen nodded. "I understand." After saying that, he paused for a moment before smiling as if he was mocking himself. "Actually, I've also knelt to you before. Speaking of which, I'm not qualified to laugh at them. Those people are all small fries. Humans are born with the mentality of looking up to the strong," Perfected Lord Tianlan said calmly. "Too many people have always admired and looked up to the high and mighty experts, thinking that they are omnipotent. It's as if there's a dazzling brilliance around those experts no matter how you look at them. They've reduced themselves to dust and become ants." He looked at Lu Chen and said, "Do you think I'm right?" He looked at Lu Chen and said, "Do you think what I said makes sense?" Perfected Lord Tianlan replied, "Of course there will always be some ambitious elites. However, what do you think if I say that most mortals are like that?" Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled and patted Lu Chen's shoulder with a gentle expression and gaze. "You're different from them. Don't be like this." Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled and patted Lu Chen's shoulder with a gentle expression and gaze. "You're different from them. Don't be like this." The red light of the blood moon had become somewhat familiar to Lu Chen. Therefore, when the light landed on him again, he even felt an inexplicable sense of intimacy. Of course, he was soon reminded of the many things that had happened in the underworld, those unpleasant memories, and his good mood was gone at once. Perfected Lord Tianlan looked up at the blood moon in the sky and narrowed his eyes as if he was observing something. After a while he said to Lu Chen, "Bring me to the place where the accident happened." Lu Chen nodded and led him forward. Although he still hadn't figured out the secret of the underground cave and the strange blood moon in the sky, as well as what exactly Perfected Lord Tianlan wanted to do underground with the Starry Hall, it was obvious that this bald Perfected Lord was very concerned about this place and attached great importance to it. It was not easy to find a place or thing that could make Perfected Lord Tianlan come to check immediately after hearing it. The blood-red light sprinkled on them, and their footsteps echoed in the empty street. The walls and doors of the big houses seemed to be stained with blood, giving off an inexplicable sense of mournfulness. Walking in this kind of place really had the illusion of walking in hell, making people feel very uncomfortable. However, Perfected Lord Tianlan and Lu Chen didn't show any discomfort on their faces. Perhaps this discomfort was nothing to them. Lu Chen had been paying attention to the surroundings while walking. The strange red mist that had floated in the air earlier was gone now, and so was the smell of blood in the air. There seemed to be no trace of what happened that day, as if it were a dream. Now he could only go to the courtyard where the incident took place to see if there were any traces left behind. Of course, Lu Chen wouldn't suspect that his eyes were playing tricks on him, or that his memory was playing tricks on him. He remembered the scene that day very clearly, including the bloody man who fell to the ground. After walking through the long street, they came to a house near the strange statue in the center of the city. Lu Chen pointed at the door and said to Perfected Lord Tianlan, "I found White Lotus in the backyard inside." Perfected Lord Tianlan nodded, but didn't enter the house immediately. Instead, he looked at the terrain here first, and then suddenly looked back at the huge statue that ran through the whole underground cave not far away. Then he seemed to frown inadvertently. After a while he said to Lu Chen, "Let's go in and have a look." Lu Chen agreed and followed him in. A gust of wind blew in from somewhere in the underground city and swept over their heads. Almost at the same time, they smelled the faint smell of blood in the wind. Perfected Lord Tianlan didn't notice it at all. With his hands behind his back and his wide robe sleeves fluttering slightly, he walked along the corridor into the backyard. Lu Chen followed him. When they walked into the backyard, A glaring and cruel red color was imprinted in their eyes. It was indeed the place that looked like a Shroud that day. Although the once scarlet blood no longer flowed and most of it had dried up and solidified, the ground, walls, and corners of the yard could still be seen with dark red bloodstains everywhere, revealing a tragic and mournful aura. Lu Chen frowned slightly and glanced at Perfected Lord Tianlan. The Perfected Lord of the Divine Transformation Realm looked calm, as if everything in front of him was no different from ordinary flowers, birds, fishes, insects, or scenery. His eyes swept over everything here calmly. Not long after, they suddenly stopped at a spot in the middle of the yard. Lu Chen followed his gaze and found that there were only a few bloodstains connected together. They looked a little scary, but other than that, there was nothing unusual. But very quickly, Lu Chen seemed to have thought of something, and his expression changed slightly. At this time, Perfected Lord Tianlan had already walked over. When he was about 4 or 5 feet away from that spot, he suddenly waved his sleeves and a gust of wind swept past. The bloodstains on the ground suddenly shattered and scattered in all directions. Then, a strange mark was revealed under the bloodstains. It looked like a human figure that had fallen to the ground. Chapter 6:11. There was only the trace of a human figure in a pool of blood on the ground, but the person who left the trace was not there and had disappeared. Lu Chen looked at the strange thing on the ground with a puzzled expression. He was extremely astonished. He had no idea what kind of technique Perfected Lord by Tianlan had used just now. It was actually able to almost completely restore the general outline of the human figure that had fallen to the ground in a pool of blood. Even though it seemed that the ground had been drowned in blood, Lu Chen was not too surprised to accurately find the place where the human figure was, but it was really incredible to be able to restore the trace in a pool of blood. At this moment, the way Lu Chen looked at Perfected Lord Tianlan was a little different. Although he had a very high evaluation of this damn Baldy in his heart, he now found that he might have underestimated this person. Were all the Perfected Lords of the Divine Transformation Realm in the world so terrifying? Or was it only this damn Baldy who was a rare genius? Perfected Lord Tianlan's eyes stayed on the trace of the human figure in the pool of blood for a moment, and then turned to look at Lu Chen. Lu Chen understood what he meant. After thinking for a while and looking at the surrounding terrain, he nodded and said with certainty, "It's here. That bloody man fell in this place." Perfected Lord Tianlan nodded, and turned to look at the backyard full of blood. As his eyes slowly swept across, he suddenly asked Lu Chen, "You said that when you first came here to find White Lotus, you met that bloody man who was covered in blood, but his spiritual power was very strong." "Yes," Lu Chen said, "at least at the level of Yuanying Realm Perfected Being." Perfected Lord Tianlan looked at him and said, "Then you knocked him down?" Lu Chen's heart suddenly skipped a beat, but he did not hesitate and said, "That person seemed to have lost his mind and was like a walking corpse. He had strength but could not be used, so he was not a strong enemy." Perfected Lord Tianlan said calmly, "You didn't fight him for 300 rounds. Judging from your tone, you probably defeated that strange person in a short time. Even if it was Perfected Yuanying who had lost his mind, it would be difficult for him to do that." He nodded and said, "You're even stronger than I imagined. However, I'm a little curious. Just what kind of Dao technique and divine ability did you use to be able to do this?" Lu Chen's heartbeat slowly sped up. He felt as if there were prickles on his back. A shivering feeling flashed through his mind. The tall figure looked like a tall mountain, looking down at him from above. There seemed to be a fork in the road in front of him. He didn't know what the future held, but he subconsciously felt a faint aura of death in front of him. The choice could only be made in an instant. How should he answer? Perfected Lord Tianlan looked at Lu Chen with a calm expression. No one could tell what he was thinking at the moment. Perhaps he was just asking out of curiosity. He did not have to wait for too long because Lu Chen quickly met his gaze. There seemed to be some hesitation in his expression, but in the end he still said, "It's a secret technique of the Devil Sect." "It's a secret technique of the Devil Sect. I learned it from Yin Shouyang," Lu Chen said. "It's evil and vicious but very useful." The atmosphere in the courtyard seemed to have cooled down for a moment. No one spoke, and the surroundings were silent. Coupled with the bloodstains all over the ground, it was mournful and tragic. It looked really lifeless, like a ghost town. Perfected Lord Tianlon looked at his disciple quietly with a deep gaze. There seemed to be some complicated emotions in his eyes. Lu Chun, on the other hand, stood in front of him, calm and unperturbed, without the slightest hint of fear. After a long while, Perfected Lord Tianlon sighed softly and broke the atmosphere that was about to freeze. Have you thought about the consequences of using such a method? There was no one else here at that time. The only person, White Lotus, was also restricted. Lu Chun said, I won't use it when there are outsiders around. Perfected Lord Tianlon still seemed to be a little worried. He frowned and said, You have many other choices. It would be better if you could completely not use these unorthodox methods. I don't have any stronger methods. Lu Chun looked into his eyes and said, I thought you should remember that I was still a child when I was sent to the devil sect. You only taught me patience and unwavering faith. I learned most of the techniques in the devil sect. Perfected Lord Tianlon suddenly stopped talking. He pursed his lips slightly and his gaze became increasingly distant as he stared at Lu Chun. It was as if in that instant, the radiance in his eyes had already penetrated the person's bones and flesh and seen through his heart. Lu Chun, on the other hand, was still standing there. After a while, he flipped his hand, and a black dagger appeared in his hand. It was short, sharp, and carried a cold and icy killing intent. Perfected Lord Tianlon's gaze fell on the black dagger. Lu Chun said, I used it to stab Yin Shouyang's back and then destroyed the god-subduing incantation formation. After saying that, he flicked his wrist and the black dagger suddenly flew up. It wasn't fast, but it flew straight towards Supreme Lord Tianlon. However, when it was still around 2 feet away from Perfected Lord Tianlon, the black dagger abruptly paused in midair and remained motionless. From the beginning to the end, Perfected Lord Tianlon did not look at the black dagger at all. His gaze was always on Lu Chun's face. He was like an unreachable peak with a natural coldness. He did not care about the ants in the world, and only cared about the boundless blue sky above his head. Perhaps the only dream and goal of a peak was to chase or even break through that sky. However, the person in front of him was not an ant in his heart. He was his disciple. Perfected Lord Tianlon stared at Lu Chun. Although he did not say anything, the invisible pressure was already as heavy as a mountain, making it difficult for Lu Chun to breathe. As time passed, the silence seemed to be increasing the burden, and he was gradually unable to bear it. Fortunately, at this moment, Perfected Lord Tianlon broke the silence again. He said to Lu Chun, The demonic techniques of the devil sect confuse one's Tao heart and harm one's foundation. From now on, don't use them anymore. Lu Chun was slightly relieved. However, before he could truly heave a sigh of relief, Perfected Lord Tianlon suddenly took a step forward and stretched out a hand, flicking out a finger. Ding! His finger flicked the edge of the black dagger. In an instant, several cracks suddenly appeared on the dark killing weapon and spread wildly. In the blink of an eye, after a muffled sound, the black dagger suddenly turned into countless tiny fragments and fell to the ground, turning into dust. Lu Chun's body shook violently. Suddenly, he let out a muffled groan and a green aura flashed across his face. Then he suddenly covered his chest with his hand and took 2 steps back. Immediately after, he spat out a mouthful of blood. He seemed to have suffered a heavy injury and almost knelt on the ground. At the same time, Perfected Lord Tianlon's figure appeared beside him like a ghost. He placed a palm on his back and a pure, righteous and warm power that was like the morning sun surged into Lu Chun's body, suppressing all the evil power that was about to explode in his body. His deep and thick voice echoed in Lu Chun's ears. It's my negligence. From today on, you will follow me to practice Tao techniques. I will teach you the magical power of the word heaven. Chapter 6:12. Most people in the world would probably be extremely moved and excited when they heard Perfected Lord Tianlon's promise. Lu Chun gritted his teeth with a pained expression on his face. He was enduring the backlash from the destruction of the black sword that he had cultivated with his life. His facial expression did not show any of this. However, his mood was still fluctuating, although not that strong. Since when did he start to distrust this divine transformation stage perfected Lord, who had raised him and taught him to be an adult? Lu Chen clearly remembered that many years ago when he was still young, his trust in this person was extremely firm, and his belief in him was indestructible. If not for this, he would not have been able to survive those difficult days in the devil cult. Because during that period of time, apart from the physical fights, it was actually more of a mental torture. A person's trust could be pure, but if there was the slightest suspicion at the beginning, even if it was just a small crack, it would quietly and slowly expand, and one would think of many things that one would not care about or think about in the past. Just like the words he had just said about his teacher's kindness, words that were enough to make one shed tears of gratitude. As Lu Chen endured the pain on his body with a pained expression, he couldn't help but secretly think in a dark corner of his heart, have I really been negligent? Even if he really had countless important things to do and plans for his only personal disciple, would he really neglect to teach his disciple? Or perhaps, in the previous days, he had other plans in mind? Lu Chen felt that at this moment he suddenly understood what the saying, "People's hearts are unpredictable," meant. This person's mind was too hard to guess, and it was already very difficult for him to trust him unconditionally like before. After a long while, the pain in his body was slowly suppressed. Perfected Lord Tianlan's expression relaxed a little, and he withdrew his palm and straightened up. Lu Chen moved his body and felt that the meridians in his body that had been damaged by the backlash had almost been completely repaired. He was secretly a little speechless, so he nodded to Perfected Lord Tianlan, and then said after a moment of hesitation, "Thank you." "Thank me for what?" Perfected Lord Tianlan looked at him playfully and said, "Are you thanking me for helping you or thanking me for saying that I would teach you Dao skills and mystiques?" Lu Chen said, "I guess so. At least today, I feel like I didn't become your disciple in vain." Perfected Lord Tianlan was stunned for a moment, and then he suddenly grinned as if he was happy. He even patted Lu Chen on the shoulder and said with a chuckle, "Boy, live well. You still have a long life ahead of you." "Yeah," Lu Chen nodded and said, "It wasn't easy for me to live to this day. I don't want to die." Perfected Lord Tianlan burst into laughter. The deep laughter seemed to have broken the somber and mournful atmosphere in the courtyard, causing the surrounding colors to become much warmer. Perfected Lord Tianlan seemed to be born with this ability. He could change the world around him with his own strength, instead of going with the flow and adapting to this world. When his gaze returned to the courtyard, it was clear that he had not forgotten the original purpose of his visit. His gaze once again fell on the blood-colored figure on the ground. After sizing it up a few times, he raised his head and looked further into the courtyard. Many places in the spacious courtyard were covered by blood, including the walls, railings, and corners. There was blood everywhere, including the edge of an inconspicuous well at the back of the courtyard. Perfected Lord Tianlan's gaze swept across the well. After pondering for a moment, he turned to Lu Chen and said, "There's something that I need you to do for me." Lu Chen was a little surprised. He did not expect Perfected Lord Tianlan to suddenly make such a request at this time, but he still said, "What do you need me to do?" Perfected Lord Tianlan said, "Go back to the entrance on the surface now and ask the guards outside to immediately find Shuang using the most urgent method. Then wait there. When you see Shuang, ask her to arrange 100 absolutely trustworthy subordinates to come to the underground city together. I have something urgent that I need them to do." After a pause, Perfected Lord Tianlan looked at Lu Chen meaningfully and said, "If you don't go and tell her, she probably won't believe me." Lu Chen's heart was in turmoil. He was full of doubts, but in the end he nodded and agreed to it. Then he turned and walked out of the courtyard. When he walked out of the gate of the residence, he could not help but look back. He could no longer see Perfected Lord Tianlan's tall figure. He did not know why, but he felt that something was not right. What urgent matter could this damn Baldy have? Why did this order give him the feeling that it was deliberately sending him away? Lu Chen frowned. After hesitating for a moment, he shook his head and walked quickly to the entrance on the surface. In the backyard, Perfected Lord Tianlan stood quietly on the spot. He seemed to have waited patiently for quite a while. Even though there was a distance between them and a high wall between them, and he didn't even turn his head, This deity transformation stage true monarch seemed to be able to clearly see Lu Chen's every move, or rather, feel everything. Only when Lu Chen strode far away did he slowly open his eyes. There was a somewhat deep look on his face. Then he swept his gaze across the courtyard. A gust of wind blew past, his robe fluttered slowly. Suddenly, there seemed to be lightning flashing in the depths of his eyes, suddenly becoming sharp. On the ground that was covered by the pool of blood, on the ground not far from that blood-colored figure, slowly, a footprint appeared. It was a footprint stained with blood. Then there was a second, a third, one after another. The footprints slowly extended forward until they stopped at the edge of the well. Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled somewhat disdainfully. His expression seemed to show that he never cared about anything, even if there might be a great enemy hidden here. He did not even bother to make any preparations to investigate or defend himself. He directly flew up and landed on the dry well, looking down. The bottom of the dry well was gloomy and dark, like a bottomless nest. But he did not hesitate at all. He just sneered and then fell down. If Lu Chen were here, he would probably be amazed that the mouth of the dry well was not big enough to accommodate Tianlan's body at all. But this fat man went straight through it unreasonably, and fell into the mouth of the well. The darkness below instantly swarmed up. Then, as if there was a malicious ghost howling in the darkness suddenly boiled up. In an instant, countless strong winds rushed over from all directions. All kinds of terrifying ghost faces, demons, ferocious beasts, and even skeletons and spirits swarmed over, covering the sky and covering the earth. They wanted to tear this person who suddenly broke into pieces. Time seemed to freeze at that moment. It seemed that the most terrifying scene in the world was happening in this dark corner. But the face of perfected Lord Tianlan, who was surrounded by countless terrifying existences in the faint light, did not change at all. He still had that contemptuous and arrogant look on his face. He flicked his sleeves as if he was a little annoyed. A strong wind suddenly rose and suddenly broke the silence. Like a sledgehammer chiseling into solid ice, the scene instantly shattered and collapsed. In the face of absolute and almost terrifying power, all the darkness and fear melted like snow and instantly collapsed. Boom! All the ghost shadows suddenly shattered, and turned into fragments that filled the sky. But they could not touch that figure at all. In the whistling sound, his huge body slowly landed on the ground, and then looked at the darkness in the dry well. There seemed to be a figure lying in the dark corner in the dim darkness. Chapter 6:13. There was an ancient religion that once left behind a very widespread saying. All fear and dread is like an illusion, or an illusion. It was hard to say whether this saying was right or wrong, but the wisdom of the sages had been passed down for thousands of years, so there was probably some truth to it. If one cultivated the mind and used one's own heart as the foundation, viewing all things in the world as an illusion, perhaps one would be able to ignore all disturbances and see one's true heart when one cultivated to the highest realm. At that level, regardless of whether one's cultivation was profound or if one numbed oneself, the effect would be about the same. Perfected Lord Tianlan's skills were profound and his knowledge was unfathomable. Of course, he knew a thing or two about this ancient doctrine. However, he had always scoffed at it. Moreover, his cultivation method was the pinnacle of worldly affairs, which was the complete opposite of this school of thought which focused on worldly affairs. He didn't even believe in karma and retribution, believing that everything in the world was under his control. What retribution in the next life? What cycle of reincarnation? In his eyes, all of them were illusions. Only great power was fundamental, and only this life and this world was the only one. Since ancient times, countless legends of gods had been passed down in the human world. But had they ever seen one in thousands of years? Where were the gods, demons, immortals, and Buddhas of the heavens? There was a blue sky above and a thick earth below. No matter how many tragic things happened, they would probably pass quietly like flowing water and floating clouds, not leaving many traces. He stared at the black shadow, his heart suddenly filled with a rare feeling. He put his hands behind his back and looked down at the man. He actually recalled the path he had walked for most of his life. He then smiled, without the slightest bit of regret. The shadow in the darkness trembled slightly, like a person on the verge of death subconsciously twitching. Perfected Lord Tianlan looked at him with a calm expression and said, "We meet again." His deep voice echoed in the dark dry well, deep and vaguely carrying a strange power, causing the shadow to tremble again. Then, a strange red light suddenly flashed in the darkness, like the angry eyes of a fierce beast about to bleed. However, Perfected Lord Tianlan didn't care about it at all. He seemed to always be high and mighty, and nothing could affect his mind, not even his basic emotions. He even took a few steps forward and stood beside the human silhouette in the darkness. He touched the body of the black figure with his foot. The figure turned over and rolled on the ground. Supreme Lord Tianlan let out a sigh and casually sat down on the ground. He no longer looked at the black shadow but raised his head to look at the sky above the dry well. The red and mournful light of the blood moon flickered above the small well. Looking from here, it seemed that the whole world outside was blood red. "Are you going to die?" He opened his mouth and said. "Although this is your original fate, I'm still quite surprised. You've been pestering me with all your might for so many years, yet you've actually fallen into the hands of these young people at such an old age. I'm very surprised." "Ah!" Roar. In the darkness beside Perfected Lord Tianlan, the figure flipped over and seemed to struggle on the ground for a few times, uttering vague sounds that were filled with deep-rooted hatred and anger. His gaze was like a blade in the darkness, filled with vicious curses as he glared at Perfected Lord Tianlan. Retracting his gaze, Perfected Lord Tianlan turned to look at him. "Seems like you've woken up? That's good too. At least you'll know when you die." He smiled and said, "I know what you want to say. Do you want to know what's going on with the child I snatched away from you back then?" A low and hoarse howl came from the darkness. It was as if the pain and hatred accumulated over countless years had erupted at this moment. However, this was meaningless to Perfected Lord Tianlan. He didn't even bat an eyelid. He looked like a god without any human emotions, looking down at the pain of the people indifferently. He opened his mouth and said, "Have you been telling yourself all these years that you'll just pretend that you don't have that child? Perhaps one day, I'll directly kill that child? So, as long as you take revenge on me and think of a way to kill me, it'll be considered revenge?" The black figure fell silent. Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled and said, "Look, everyone is like this. I can always see through your thoughts. You all think that things will get better, and that things might be as you wish. However, you probably understand me a little, don't you?" He lowered his head and his voice seemed to have become softer. "But in the depths of your heart, is there a voice telling you that I won't do that? How could someone like me do something so superficial? I'll definitely set up a backup plan and teach that child a good lesson. I'll make you suffer the most terrifying pain in the world. That's my way of doing things, right?" Roar, roar. A series of roars suddenly rang out. The black figure trembled all over, as if he was about to pounce on Perfected Lord Tianlan. He was already extremely furious. However, Perfected Lord Tianlan shook his head and said, "Stop pretending. I won't tell you. You'll always have to fantasize like this. Imagine how much pain that child has suffered under my hands. Imagine what kind of hell and torment he might be going through right now. There are countless miserable things in this world. Sorrow, pain, torture, and madness. You can't help but wonder if they'll happen to him." Perfected Lord Tianlan's voice reverberated in the dry well like the judgment of a god. The black figure quietened down. He slowly lowered his head and no longer made a sound. Perfected Lord Tianlan stood up and took a few steps outside. At this moment, the blood moon above his head suddenly lit up. It was as if the light had suddenly become several times brighter. For a moment, the blood-colored light actually shone down on the dry well, dispersing the surrounding darkness. It formed a strange light beam that shone on his body. It looked as if the light had descended from the sky and enveloped his body. Perfected Lord Tianlan stopped and looked up. His expression was still rather calm. He only frowned slightly as if he was a little surprised but not worried. However, when the blood-colored light shone into the depths of his eyes, the bald Perfected Lord's body suddenly trembled. Then, a look of confusion slowly appeared on his face. At this moment, a shrill howl suddenly rang out in the darkness of the dry well. Countless ghosts and spirits that had long dissipated appeared again, and pounced on perfected Lord Tianlan from all directions. Among the thousands of mournful shadows, one particularly resolute figure charged over with an aura of death, wanting to perish together with this person. Perfected Lord Tianlan's eyes suddenly seemed to be lit up with two balls of scorching golden flames, as if two suns were rising. At the same time, the blood moon in the sky that had never changed suddenly dimmed a little at this moment. In the next moment, perfected Lord Tianlan's body shone brightly like a blazing sun. He looked down at the weak darkness and pitiful ants in disdain. Majestic and invincible, he spread out in all directions. Chapter 6:14. Lu Chen stood at the entrance of the tunnel, frowning slightly as he looked at the long street in front of him. The number of people on the street had gradually increased, but he still hadn't seen Shui Ying's figure. He raised his head to look at the sky, feeling an inexplicable anxiety in his heart. Right now, perfected Lord Tianlan was alone in the mysterious underground cave. This made Lu Chen feel a rare sense of impatience. He really wanted to turn around and return to the underground cave to see what perfected Lord Tianlan was doing. Of course, he wasn't worried about the damned Baldy's safety. Although it sounded like he was a little unfilial as a disciple, sometimes Lu Chen would be surprised to find that his confidence in his master, who always had complicated emotions, was firmer than most people in this world. There probably wasn't anyone in this world who could assassinate that damned Baldy, right? If there really was such a powerful person, Lu Chen would probably even applaud in amazement. However, from his previous words and actions, Lu Chen clearly felt that the damned Baldy probably had some secret that he didn't want him to know. So he deliberately sent him away. What was that secret? Was it related to that underground city, or to that mysterious missing bloody man? Lu Chen had thousands of questions in his heart, but he still stood there rationally, waiting for Shui Ying's arrival. The leader of the guards at the cave entrance, Lu Ting, was also standing next to Lu Chen. When he looked at Lu Chen, his eyes were filled with intimacy and gratitude. It was obvious that he was grateful for the kind words that Lu Chen had said in front of Lord Tianlan. After standing with Lu Chen for a long time, he sensed that Lu Chen was a little anxious. After hesitating for a moment, he comforted him. It will take a while for the messenger to reach the mountain from here. He also needs to report to Hall Master Shui. After that, as you said, it will take some time for Hall Master Shui to send 100 people over. Young master, don't be anxious. Wait a little longer. Lu Chen nodded slightly, knowing that Lu Ting was right. In fact, he had deliberately confused Lord Tianlan's intentions when he sent the message just now. According to the damned Baldy's original intention, he probably wanted Shui Ying to come over first, then let Lu Chen personally tell her to send people, and then enter the underground together. All sorts of delays and wasting time would take a long time even with Fuyunji's usual efficiency. Lu Chen didn't believe that perfected Lord Tianlan had said something wrong, or that he hadn't thought of these things. Even if everyone in the world went crazy, he felt that the last person left with a clear mind would be the dead Baldy. Therefore, it was obvious that this guy was deliberately delaying so that Lu Chen and Shui Ying would come over later. What was he planning to do alone in the underground city, in that house full of bloodstains? Lu Chen didn't know, but Lu Chen was very anxious. He felt a faint uneasiness in his heart, as if he had missed something important, or something big was about to happen. However, it was as if he was separated by a high wall, unable to see or hear anything. Time was still passing bit by bit. Although Lu Chen's face hadn't reached the point where he would lose his composure in anger, his expression had already become gloomy. Fortunately, at this moment Lu Ting, who was beside him, suddenly exclaimed in surprise, then pointed to the sky and said, "Young master, Hall Master Shui and the others are here." Shui Ying had indeed come. Just as Lu Chen's rumor had requested, a team of 100 people had come with her. Each of them looked taciturn, but their auras were deep and powerful. Needless to say, they were definitely the most reliable and powerful elite troops in Fuyunji. When this group of people arrived, the guards guarding the tunnel entrance were immediately intimidated. One by one, they retreated, some of them even pressing their backs against the wall. These elites were obviously very experienced. In an instant, several of them surrounded the entrance of the tunnel, guarding the most important throat area. Shuang walked in front of Lu Chen and glanced at him. Even though Lu Chen had been on bad terms with her recently, he couldn't help but admire this woman's ability to handle matters. For so many years, she had always been the #1 confidant of Lord Tianlan, and was known as the most powerful woman on Mount Tianlong. There was indeed a reason why she was called the most powerful woman on Mount Tianlong. However, this was obviously not the time to praise, flatter, or get close to him. Lu Chen pulled Shuang to the side and used the simplest words to describe what had happened. In the end, he said, "That's what happened. I'm just passing on Master's words. I'll have to trouble you." Shuang nodded. Her face didn't show any displeasure at being ordered around by Lu Chen. She only said calmly, "You did the right thing. Now that everyone is here, shall we go down now?" Lu Chen had been in a hurry to return to the underground city, but when the time came, he subconsciously hesitated. However, he quickly nodded and said, "All right, follow me." 5 of the elite troops stayed behind to guard the exit, while the rest followed Lu Chen and Shuang into the underground. This caused the expressions of Lu Ting and the other guards to turn ugly. Some of them even looked angry. However, Shuang ignored them, and Lu Chen didn't say anything. He understood what Shuang was thinking. Currently, the 3 most important and powerful people in Fuyunji's faction had all entered a dangerous place, and it just so happened that there was only one exit. Therefore, the importance of guarding this place became obvious. This had nothing to do with trust, it was just a necessary guarantee. Along the way, Lu Chen and Shuang quickly saw the blood moon, as well as the blood-colored moonlight that was everywhere in the underground cave. Just as Lu Chen called out to Shuang and pointed in the direction of the house, he was about to walk in that direction when suddenly, the ground of the underground cave shook violently. This vibration was extremely strong, to the point where even these elites with cultivation were almost thrown off their feet when they were unprepared. The surrounding stone walls and stone domes buzzed and many shattered stones fell down. In an instant, everyone's expression changed. This scene looked too similar to an earthquake. There was a limit to one's strength. No matter how strong one's cultivation was, if they really encountered a natural disaster, they would be helpless. At that moment, countless people had the thought that the heavens wanted Fuyunji to die. Fortunately, it seemed that the heavens still wanted to give the damned Baldy some face. The shaking only lasted for a while before it calmed down. The falling stones also gradually stopped. While everyone was still in shock, before anyone could say anything, a dazzling beam of light suddenly burst forth from the center of the empty underground city in front of them. It was as if the sun had exploded, forcing back the blood moon's radiance that filled the sky. In the golden light, a figure slowly rose. 100,000 zhang of light enveloped his body, shining brilliantly, as if a real god had descended to the world. It made people worship him. Around Lu Chen, there were people who became excited. However, when he looked at the light in shock, looking at the damned Baldy in the light who was displaying his power like a miracle, he suddenly faintly saw that at the end of the light, behind the glory, a dark shadow flickered in the light. Like a person quietly waving his hand, but also like a desperate struggle. Then it dissipated in the brilliant light, turning into nothingness and ashes. Lu Chen stared blankly at the scene in the distance. He was at a loss, but he suddenly felt a pain in his heart. He did not know where it came from. Chapter 6:15. Even though there had been a violent tremor on that day, and nearly 100 people had witnessed the godlike appearance of Supreme Lord Tianlan in the underground city, this news did not spread throughout Zhengxianmeng in the end. This was not an easy task for Zhengxianmeng, which was already like a sieve, because both Supreme Lord Tianlan and Shuang had given the order to keep it a secret after the incident. This also proved that the 100 people that Shuang had brought with her this time were reliable enough, and no one had leaked the news to the outside world. However, although outsiders did not know the specifics of what had happened, it did not mean that no one had noticed anything strange. In the True Immortal Alliance, which was the world's largest Vanity Fair of intrigue, spying on each other and infiltrating each other were common occurrences. Even the guards at the entrance of the tunnel were actually spied on by some unknown people both openly and secretly. Needless to say, Shuang had suddenly gathered her elite subordinates, and there were quite a few of them. This was a huge commotion, and it immediately alarmed many people and forces, causing them to pay attention to this place. After all, Fuyunji was currently the most powerful hall in the limelight, and it was the place that all the major forces valued the most. What was Fuyunji doing? What were they doing underground? Within a day, this question had become the question in the hearts of many forces and leaders in Zhengxianming. Probing and investigations regarding this matter had also begun without batting an eyelid. The leader of Zhengxianming's Grand Chancellor, True Lord Guangbo, had a somewhat controversial reputation in the world of cultivators for many years. As one of the 6 true lords of Zhengxianming, of course he had a respectable status, and was worthy of the phrase, high position and power. However, for so many years, he had been in charge of Zhengxianming's money and power. Rumors of corruption and borrowing money to make money had always been heard, and voices of criticism could often be heard on the streets. True Lord Guangbo had always scoffed at such a phenomenon, and bitterly hated it. He claimed that he had worked his heart out for Zhengxianming, used the great hopes of the world to prosper the Raising Immortals Union, supported the weak, rewarded the heroes, and made great contributions to the growth of Zhengxianming. He even said that without him, Zhengxianming would not have been able to develop to such a strong state today. Not to mention that without his strong financial support, probably Zhengxianming and Fuyunji would not have been able to completely defeat the remnants of the evil cult. When such a great credit was put on his head, True Lord Guangbo did not feel embarrassed or hesitated at all. At his level he had everything, so what did it matter to chase after a little fame? But recently, True Lord Guangbo found that he seemed to have thought wrong before. He felt that he did not have enough fame and fortune. The title and reputation of the most powerful person in the world, the most powerful person in the Immortals Union, did not belong to him, but to Tianlan, who always wore a big bald head. There were so many treasures, gold and silver. Didn't it say that the wealth of the major sects in Zhengxianming should be managed by the Grand Chancellor? Why did all the major sects, especially Fuyunji, dare to seize so much? They despised the golden rule set by Zhengxianming that year. They were all ambitious and treacherous officials. If I don't come out to uphold justice, won't it be like a long night without light? Why does the world look a bit chaotic? Perfected Lord Guangbo suppressed the surging and scorching thoughts in his mind, took a sip of tea, and said to Perfected Lord Guyu. The two of them were drinking tea in a secluded garden behind the starry hall. There was no one in the garden, and True Lord Guangbo had deliberately hidden his tracks and came here quietly. True Lord Guyu looked at him and poured another cup of immortal tea for him, then smiled and said, "Why, Brother Guangbo cares about the world so much? Did you see any injustice again?" "There are many injustices in the world," Immortal Guangbo said to him bluntly. "Let's talk about the last time we met with old man Taihu. I should have been the leader. After all, I was the one who organized everyone to do this big thing, but the two of you pushed me aside. It's really sad." True Lord Guyu nodded with a smile and said, "Speaking of this, I still admire Brother Guangbo very much. It's great that you can look at the big picture." True Lord Guangbo sneered and said, "What big picture? Don't say such things in front of us. The reason why I temporarily endured it that day was because of the look you gave me at the end. Today, I'm here to hear what you have to say about me. If it's really the same old nonsense, don't blame me for turning against you." True Lord Guyu nodded, and seemed to have no intention of beating around the bush. He said directly, "Okay, Brother Guangbo is a straightforward person, then I'll be straightforward." He pointed to a direction far away from Mount Tianlong and said, "Let's cut to the chase and speak the truth. Based on the current strength of the Fuyun office in Tianlan, do you, me, Taihu, as well as the Golden Dragon and Drifting Cloud clans have the capability to contend against them?" True Lord Guangbo frowned and stared at True Lord Guyu for a moment, then said lightly, "Not a single one." "That's it." True Lord Guyu said to True Lord Guangbo, "Now that Fuyunji is powerful and in the limelight, this is the reason why we have to secretly form an alliance to fight against them. If that's the case, when there's a battle in the future, The one who is at the forefront will probably suffer the most, right? True Lord Guangbo was stunned for a moment. Suddenly, his eyes brightened and said, "You mean to let the old man Taihu go to the front to block them?" But then he shook his head and said, "The old man Taihu is a cunning old man, he won't be fooled so easily." True Lord Guyu said lightly, "Since he's the leader and wants to get the biggest share of the benefits, I'm afraid it won't be justifiable if he doesn't put in the most effort. If that's the case, we can just say that we're all breaking up. I don't believe that Taihu will really give up those things that he has already marked as his territory. Moreover," he smiled and continued, "when it really comes to that, everyone will have already turned against each other. Tianlan will definitely know that the leader of our side is Taihu. If the situation suddenly changes and we quit, don't you think Taihu will panic? Do you think Taihu will dare to deal with that lunatic Tianlan alone? Will he have no choice but to try his best to maintain this alliance and put all his assets on the table to fight with all his might?" True Lord Guangbo stared at True Lord Guyu for a while and suddenly gasped. He said, "Good plan. Brother Guyu, I've really underestimated you in the past." True Lord Guyu waved his hand and said, "It's just a small trick. You and I are close friends. All these years, the Grand Chancellor has taken good care of the Star Hall. That's why I'm telling you these things. I hope you won't blame me, Brother Guangbo." True Lord Guangbo laughed and said, "Not at all. We'll do as Brother Guyu says." After that, he pondered for a moment as if he suddenly thought of something. He then said, "Oh yes, speaking of this, I wonder if you also felt the movement at the foot of Sky Dragon Mountain? It should be caused by Tianlan, right?" Chapter 6:16. Guyu was stunned for a moment, then said, "I did notice it, but I couldn't immediately determine that it had something to do with Fuyunji. I just felt that it was different from an ordinary earthquake." As he spoke, he glanced at Perfected Lord Guangbo with a complicated look in his eyes. "Brother Guangbo, how can you be so sure that it has something to do with Tianlan?" Perfected Lord Guangbo said proudly, "What's so difficult about that? It's just a trick I set up earlier. Not only did the earthquake have something to do with Tianlan, but I can also determine that it happened at the underground entrance in the White Tiger district of the Immortal City. Someone saw it with their own eyes." Guyu's eyes flickered, but his expression didn't change. He nodded and said, "Brother Guangbo, you're really good. I admire you. But since you can determine the location and range, I wonder if Brother Guangbo can tell me what exactly happened?" Perfected Lord Guangbo laughed dryly, then shrugged and said, "I'm not sure about that. Old man Tianlan sent a group of his most trusted men to watch the underground entrance. Other than his trusted men from Fuyunji, no one else can enter the underground. So until now, we still don't know what he's doing there." Guyu replied with an, "Oh," and looked thoughtful. Perfected Lord Guangbo looked at him and suddenly smiled. There seemed to be a deeper meaning in his eyes. He said, "Brother Guyu, if I remember correctly, that place has been forcefully occupied by Fuyunji, and people from other halls are not allowed to enter. But before that, Tianlan seemed to have invited you down, and asked you to lead many people from Starry Hall to work in the underground city for a while. Am I right?" Guyu frowned and nodded after a while. "That's true. Brother Guangbo. What do you want to know?" Perfected Lord Guangbo said, "Other than Fuyunji's people, Brother Guangbo is the one who knows the most about the situation in the underground cave. Brother, please tell me what secrets are there. And why did Tianlan ask you to go there? What did he ask you to do?" He smiled, but there was no joy in his smile. Instead, there was a sense of scrutiny. He said, "In addition, do you know what Tianlan did underground?" Guyu Perfected Lord pondered for a moment, then said frankly, "There is nothing that cannot be said. Since Brother Guangbo has asked, I will tell you the truth. The underground cavern is extremely deep and vast, and there's a city hidden there. Although the houses and pavilions are similar to the buildings in the human world, they're much larger in size. It doesn't look like a place where ordinary people live." At this point, Guyu True Monarch's voice gradually became softer, showing signs of hesitation on her face. Perfected Lord Guangbo asked hurriedly, "What exactly is it? Did you guys find out?" Supreme Guyu shook her head and said, We can't find out, but when I was chatting with Tianlon in the underground city that day, I heard him say that he guessed that it might be the underground city of the demon clan in the past. Devil race. Perfected Lord Guangbo suddenly gasped. Obviously, with his status, he knew some secrets of the past. But soon his expression returned to normal. Obviously, he thought that this matter shouldn't be a big deal. Otherwise, Tianlon and Guyu wouldn't be so calm. It was probably a well-preserved relic or ruin. Perfected Lord Guangbo thought so, but he didn't take this matter to heart. Perhaps he didn't expect that there were actually some lunatics in this world that he didn't expect. Lunatics or geniuses. Sometimes it was just a fine line. Perfected Lord Guangbo threw the irrelevant matters of the demon clan to the back of his mind, and asked Guyu True Monarch what he was more concerned about. Why did Tianlon ask you to go underground? Guyu True Monarch said, You know, there is an ancient relic under the immortal city that was sealed by our Zhengxianming patriarch. After the earthquake a few days ago, the seal was slightly damaged, and it was in the underground cave, so Tianlon asked me to repair it. He smiled and said, You know, our Starry Hall used to do this kind of thing. Perfected Lord Guangbo nodded slowly, agreeing with this statement. After frowning and thinking for a while, he asked again, If that's the case, in Brother Guyu's opinion, what happened underground not long ago? Could it be that Tianlon did something down there? Guyu True Monarch was silent for a moment, then said, I really don't know. You know, there was some discord between me and Tianlon a few days ago. Starry Hall and Floating Cloud also had a dispute, and the Starry Hall disciples who were originally stationed there were also withdrawn. I haven't been there for a long time. Perfected Lord Guangbo replied with a and rolled his eyes. Suddenly he said, Brother Guyu, I have a presumptuous request. Please don't take offense. Guyu True Monarch's heart skipped a beat and he said, Please say it. Perfected Lord Guangbo said, I still need to trouble you to make a trip down there, in the name of repairing or re-examining the seal, to see what happened underground. With your identity and this excuse, I don't think those people in Fuyunji would dare to stop you. Suddenly, a strange expression flashed across Perfected Lord Guangbo's face, and he looked at Perfected Lord Guangbo. Perfected Lord Guangbo sighed, stood up and cupped his hands. He said, This is an important matter, and we have to be cautious. Although this matter will affect Brother Guyu's reputation, for the sake of our alliance, please make a trip. It's best if there are no more accidents. Perfected Lord Guangbo stared at him for a long time, and in the end, he suddenly smiled bitterly, and there seemed to be an indescribable expression on his face. In the end he nodded and said, I understand. Since Brother Guangbo has said so, I won't refuse. I'll make this trip. Perfected Lord Guangbo was overjoyed, and said with a smile, Thank you, thank you. After coming out of the underground city, the people in Fuyunji quickly dispersed. After Shuang asked for Perfected Lord Tianlan's instructions, she also left with her people. Although it seemed that they had made a wasted trip, no one had any complaints. Everyone knew that Perfected Lord Tianlan must be doing something extremely important. What kind of big event could it be? No one in Fuyunji, including Shuang, asked any questions. If Perfected Lord Tianlan didn't say anything, it meant that they didn't need to know. After so many years, they were already used to this. However, there was another person in the crowd who wasn't so numb. He was full of doubts and curiosity about what happened when Perfected Lord Tianlan was alone underground. He really wanted to know what had happened. He was Lu Chen. Actually, when he walked into the main hall of Kunlun, Lu Chen also had some doubts. He didn't understand the unusually strong emotional impulse he had this time, but no matter what, he still wanted to ask that damn Baldy what had happened in that light. After all, he and Tianlan came here together, so he felt that he should know something. When he walked into the hall, he saw Perfected Lord Tianlan sitting on his lotus throne, which was rarely seen. Even from such a distance, he could feel that the person on the throne was staring at him with bright eyes, as if waiting for something. Chapter 6:17. Perfected Lord Tianlan watched as Lu Chen walked in. He did not say anything, nor did he say anything. He just sat quietly on the lotus throne. He wasn't sitting in an upright and dignified manner. Instead, he was sitting in a very casual and comfortable manner. He even put one hand on his knee and supported his chin with his palm. He looked at Lu Chun with a glimmer in his eyes, as if he was hiding some complicated emotions. Lu Chun could not understand what this person was thinking. He only felt that the damn Baldy today seemed to be a little different from usual. Was it because of what happened in the underground cavern? He walked to the lotus throne and stopped. Just as he was thinking about how to ask, he heard Perfected Lord Tianlan's voice coming from the high lotus throne. Do you have something to say to me? Lu Chun looked up at the throne uncomfortably. Usually, when they met or were alone, Perfected Lord Tianlan was very close and kind to him. He almost never sat on the high lotus throne to talk to him. He would either stand with him or casually sit on the ground. But this time, with the high lotus throne between them, it was as if there was a chasm between the two of them. They became a little estranged. Lu Chun did not know if Perfected Lord Tianlan did this on purpose, or if he was just sitting casually and did not think too much. But this way of speaking still made him feel a little depressed and unhappy. However, when this thought flashed through his mind, Lu Chun was suddenly shocked. At that moment, he suddenly reflected on himself. Given Perfected Lord Tianlan's current power, status and supreme reputation, he could actually sit on the lotus throne in front of most people in the world. Everyone would also think that it was only right. But why did he feel that it was unfair? It was because for a long time, he had unknowingly gotten used to Perfected Lord Tianlan's special treatment of him. Unknowingly, he had already taken Perfected Lord Tianlan's special treatment for granted. However, if some things were seen through, a cold, naked truth would still be revealed from his dazzling appearance. Up until now, everything Lu Chun had, status, power, wealth, and so on, was actually all because of this man he called Damn Baldy. Without Perfected Lord Tianlan, who would acknowledge a shadow like him? Shuang? Or Fuyunji's arrogant soldiers and valiant generals? He had always prided himself on being calm, but he had unknowingly stepped on the edge of a cliff. Lu Chun stood there quietly. Under his clothes, he was covered in cold sweat. Perfected Lord Tianlan was still sitting on the throne on the high platform. He rested his chin on his hand and stared at Lu Chun. There was no anger on his face, but there seemed to be a playful look in his eyes. Perfected Lord Tianlan seemed to have a unique patience for this disciple of his, which was different from others. But in the depths of his eyes, who would know what he was thinking? Would lightning suddenly descend from the sky? Under his gaze, Lu Chun seemed to be in a trance for a moment when he walked into the hall and stood under the lotus throne, but he soon recovered. He first looked up at Perfected Lord Tianlan and then asked, "Are you all right?" "Me?" Perfected Lord Tianlan didn't seem to expect that Lu Chun would ask such a question, so he was stunned for a moment. Then he shook his head and laughed. "What could happen to me?" Lu Chun said. "No matter what, you're going there with me. Later, you asked me to call someone. After I left, I didn't know what happened in the underground city. I only saw the scene of you rising at the end. So, I thought that regardless of whether you want to tell me what happened or not, I still have to come and ask if you're all right." Perfected Lord Tianlan raised his eyebrows and was a little surprised, so much so that he fell silent for a moment. Then, his body moved slightly and his unusually tall and burly body suddenly disappeared from the lotus throne. In the next moment, he appeared on the ground like a ghost, standing not far from Lu Chun. Lu Chun looked up at him with a calm expression. However, his hands subconsciously clenched a little tighter under his sleeves. Perfected Lord Tianlan stared at Lu Chun for a moment, and said with a smile, "I almost thought that I heard wrongly just now. It seems like you're actually showing concern for me? I've never seen you like this before. What's wrong with you today?" Lu Chun thought for a moment and said, "No matter what, I've bowed to you and acknowledged you as my master. You were the one who raised me since I was young. So, after thinking about it these days, I feel that I should be more respectful to you." "Ha!" Perfected Lord Tianlan seemed to be especially surprised and could not help but laugh. His eyes flickered as he said to Lu Chun with a smile, "I'm surprised that you would think that way. I thought that you would only call me a damn baldy in your heart, and still have some resentment towards me." Lu Chun fell silent and did not say anything. Perfected Lord Tianlan chuckled. When he realized that he did not get a response from Lu Chun, his expression changed slightly, and he quietened down as well. The surrounding atmosphere instantly turned from relaxed to somewhat solemn. He frowned and looked at Lu Chun with some changes in his expression. There seemed to be some joy and some fear. After a while, Lu Chun said slowly, "After the Battle of the Barren Valley, I stayed in King Shitang village for 10 years. I suffered a lot during that time. I'm sure you know how I was, right?" Perfected Lord Tianlon replied with a and placed his hands behind his back. He looked at Lu Chun and waited for him to continue. Lu Chun did not make him wait for too long and said with an extremely calm expression, "Those years were torturous for me and I was hovering between life and death every day. Since I didn't see you coming over, I naturally had some resentment towards you. It's just that after so many years, I gradually understood why you had no choice back then." At this point, he suddenly frowned and stopped talking as a look of displeasure flashed across his face. Perfected Lord Tianlon was listening attentively. He could not help but feel a little surprised when he suddenly stopped, and even had a change in expression. "What else? Why did you stop?" However, Lu Chun seemed to be a little annoyed all of a sudden and turned hostile. "No," he rolled his eyes and said angrily while waving his hand. "Say my **s. I'm not going to say any more. This is the kind of person I am. You can do whatever you want. In any case, you can do whatever you want. Are you alright? If not, I'm leaving." After being contradicted by Lu Chun, Perfected Lord Tianlon did not know why, but when he looked at Lu Chun's expression, his gaze softened a little, as if he recalled the feeling of holding the small hand of the child whom he had just taken away from him many years ago. He smiled as if the entire world had become gentle at this moment. He nodded and was not at all offended by Lu Chun's somewhat angry expression. He said with a smile, I'm fine. He walked over and patted Lu Chun's shoulder. He said with a smile, "Actually, I just did a small thing down there. I just killed a person. It's not worth mentioning." Lu Chun's body shook and he said in astonishment, "Killed someone? There's actually someone else in the city down there? Who is it?" Perfected Lord Tianlon said indifferently, "The remnant of the devil cult called Elder Ghost." As he spoke, he waved his hand as if he was shaking off an annoying dust and did not care at all. Then, he gently put his hand on Lu Chun's shoulder and walked out with his arm around him. At the same time he said, "Why do you sound a little surprised about this?" Chapter 6:18. You killed Elder Gui? Even though Lu Chun was usually calm and collected, he couldn't help but be shocked when he heard what Perfected Lord Tianlon said. He turned to look at him in shock. Perfected Lord Tianlon's palm was still on Lu Chun's shoulder. He didn't turn his head, and was still looking at the door that was getting brighter and brighter. His eyes narrowed slightly and his smile was warm but deep. He said with a smile, "Yes." After a pause he said, "Why? You sound very surprised?" Lu Chun felt a little unaccustomed to Perfected Lord Tianlon putting his hand on his shoulder. In the past, even when he was still a child, Perfected Lord Tianlon had never acted so intimately with him. However, he was not stupid enough to fling that hand away. Perhaps in his heart, he more or less felt a little bit of this person's love for him. However, that palm was warm, thick and wide. Although it wasn't a mountain, it gave people the illusion that a mountain was pressing down on them. It was as if they would be crushed to pieces in the next moment. Lu Chun thought that this was probably because when one's cultivation was too high and his strength was too strong, he would inadvertently give people a strong pressure? Or maybe it was because his habit of being a shadow was too strong. Anyone who got a little closer to him would make him feel threatened. Lu Chun shook his head slightly, shook off the boundless sense of danger in his mind, sighed and said, "We've been chasing that guy for so many years, but we've never caught him. Even though we've basically defeated the remnants of the evil faction in the Immortal City a while ago, he still escaped and became a fish that slipped through the net." He turned to look at Perfected Lord Tianlon and said, "I didn't expect you to actually be able to find and kill him." This time, Perfected Lord Tianlon turned his head and smiled at Lu Chun's expression. There was a glimmer in the depths of his eyes. Then he nodded and smiled without saying a word. Lu Chun seemed to have thought of something. After pondering for a moment, he suddenly asked, "But did you find him in the underground city? We've searched there many times in the past, but we've never found any trace of him. How did you find him this time?" His expression suddenly changed slightly and he asked in a low voice, "Is it related to the matter with White Lotus?" As they spoke, they had already walked to the entrance of Kunlun's main hall. The sunlight shone down and shone on perfected Lord Tianlan's face. The warmth seemed to be able to seep into the depths of one's heart. Even the coldest ice would warm up a little. Perfected Lord Tianlan's footsteps paused for a moment before he withdrew his hand from Lu Chen's shoulder. "Yes." He responded to Lu Chen and then walked out. Atsu was lying on the ground in front of the door of the room that originally belonged to Su Qingjun, and now inexplicably belonged to White Lotus. It was snoring loudly. The cold wind in the middle of the night seemed to be unable to blow through the layer of glossy fur on its body, and did not affect its sweet dreams at all. Now that the sun had risen and the sunlight had brought warmth, this black dog slept even more soundly. Until one moment in the room behind it, in the silence that had been maintained for a whole night, a slight sound was suddenly heard. In its sleep, Atsu did not move and did not even open its eyes. However, one of its ears suddenly stood up and trembled slightly. After a while, the sound of intermittent footsteps came from inside the house. However, the person inside the house seemed to be struggling, as if he had suffered a serious injury. Even walking had become difficult. However, from the sound of the footsteps, it seemed that the person in the room was moving slowly towards the door. Atu's eyes snapped wide open. There was no tiredness and laziness in its eyes. Instead, there was a sharp and murderous look in its eyes. As if it felt something, this black dog slowly got up, turned around, and stared at the door as if it was facing a formidable enemy. But soon, Atsu suddenly sniffed again, as if its extremely sensitive sense of smell played a role at this moment. And it smelled something again. This smell was undoubtedly familiar to Atsu. It suddenly became puzzled, and the murderous look on its body faded a lot. There was a hint of doubt in its eyes. The footsteps in the room were still ringing. One step, one stop, one step, one stop, one step, one stop. It seemed to be walking with great difficulty. But even in this strange rhythm, it could still roughly feel that the person in the room seemed to be recovering from a serious illness, and was slowly recovering. The pauses between the footsteps became shorter and shorter. Not long after, the person in the room walked behind the door. Now there was only a thin door between Atsu and the person in the room. Atsu stared at the door. It did not roar, nor did it bark, nor did it have the intention to turn around and leave. For some reason, the situation looked a bit like a confrontation between Atsu and the unknown person. The room became quiet. Perhaps the person in the room felt something, but the door was still closed. The person in the room did not open the door, nor did he have the intention to come out. After a while, the footsteps sounded again, but it gradually left the door and slowly walked to the other side of the room. Then, it gradually faded until the sound completely disappeared, and everything became quiet again. Atu looked at the door quietly, then looked up at the sky. It was unclear whether he was looking at the sky or the warm sun. Then he lay down on the ground like a loyal guard, fulfilling his promise from beginning to end. Supreme Tianlan did not tell Lu Chen more about Elder Ghost, including the strange time and place, and the strange way. He did not even mention a word about Lu Chen sending him away. Of course, Lu Chen was not very satisfied with this, but the person standing in front of him was the most powerful person in the world, a deity transformation stage perfected cultivator, who stood at the peak of the human cultivation world, so he could do and say whatever he wanted, and no one could force him to do so. Although Lu Chen was not convinced, he still accepted this result. Fortunately, his original intention of coming here this time was more or less answered by Supreme Tianlan, so he did not gain nothing. In addition, he seemed to vaguely feel that in this rare master-disciple relationship of theirs, their relationship had probably become a little better? Or in other words, perfected Lord Tianlan would more or less trust him. Lu Chen could not say whether he was happy or sad about this, but he could only accept it. But before leaving, he still found a chance to say to Supreme Tianlan, "By the way, there's something I've wanted to discuss with you for a long time." Let's talk about it by the way today. Ah, Supreme Tianlon said, what is it? I'm going to find Supreme Tiahu and help someone pass a message to him. Lu Chen smiled bitterly and said, I know your relationship is not very good, and the atmosphere in the Immortal Allies is a little subtle recently, so I haven't gone there. I want to see if I can delay it until a good time. But now I feel that it has been delayed for too long, so I want to inform you. Do you think it's convenient? Perfected Lord Tianlon glanced at him with a calm expression. Who are you passing a message for? There are not many people in this world who are qualified to pass a message to a perfected cultivator of the deity realm. Oh, actually, it's not a human but a wolf, Lu Chen said honestly. Chapter 619. Yes, the heavenly wolf on the Great Snow Mountain was very likely to be the father of the stupid dog of Atsu. The ancient divine beast with a body as huge as a hill had once entrusted Lu Chen to pass a message to a guy named Tiehu after he returned to the central region. Of course, there were not many people named Tiehu in the world. As long as one was not a fool or a moron, he or she would probably know the word taboo. For example, after Baldi became famous all over the world, there would not be many children named Tianlon. On the contrary, if someone had the word Tianlon in their name, in order to avoid trouble, they would often change their name. It might not be a big deal to have the same name as a powerful and unattainable perfected deity of Huashan realm. Therefore, Lu Chen did not need to investigate too carefully to be sure that the person the heavenly wolf wanted to pass the message to must be immortal Tiehu, one of the 6 perfected deity of Zhengxianmeng. In addition to the above reasons, there was actually another very simple reason. That was, the heavenly wolf was a terrible ancient fierce beast, and the Great Snow Mountain was a dangerous place. How could ordinary people get close to it? After thinking about it, the only possible candidate left was immortal Tiehu. It had been a long time since Lu Chen returned to the central region from the Great Snow Mountain, including the time when he arrived at the immortal city where the headquarters of Zhengxianmeng was located. During this period he had seen immortal Tiehu several times, but almost all of them were in the presence of many outsiders, and most of the time, immortal Tianlon was also present. As the only successor of immortal Tianlon, Lu Chen was rapidly integrating into the system of Fuyunji, and gradually becoming the kind of person who held power in Zhengxianmeng. At the same time, of course, he could feel the undercurrent surging between immortal Tianlon and immortal Tiehu, as well as between Fuyunji and Tianjutsu Hall. Under such circumstances, of course, Lu Chen didn't want to do anything that might be misunderstood by Lord Tianlon. For example, he inexplicably went to meet immortal Tiehu alone, and said something that nobody knew. Perhaps Lord Tianlon wouldn't necessarily suspect him, but this was purely making trouble for himself. Therefore, Lu Chen originally wanted to suppress this matter for a period of time. When the battle between these two big shots calmed down a little, when everyone calmed down and the conflict was not so sensitive, he would find an opportunity to pass on a message. Anyway, Sirius was far away in the Great Snowy Mountain, and there was no time limit when they parted. It should be okay to drag it out for a while. Listening to Lu Chen's narration and explanation, true Lord Tianlan's expression gradually calmed down. He looked at Lu Chen thoughtfully. After a while, he did not see any anger or strange look on his face. Instead, he looked at Lu Chen with interest and said, "This matter is nothing. I approve. Go and talk to Taihu." But he shook his big head and asked curiously, "I'm a little curious. Your original idea is not wrong. It's okay to wait for a period of time to talk about it. Why did you suddenly change your mind now?" After a moment of silence, Lu Chen said, "I thought for a while just now, and I have a feeling that you probably won't have a good relationship anymore." He sighed and said, "I have officially promised Sirius about this matter. Although that guy is not a human, he is more terrible than a human. After thinking about it, I think it's better to end this matter as soon as possible so that I don't have to worry about it." True Lord Tianlan looked at him for a while, and suddenly laughed. He nodded and said, "Good, end it as soon as possible. All right, you go and talk to him." Lu Chen said and nodded to True Lord Tianlan as a greeting. Then he was about to leave. However, when he had only taken 2 or 3 steps, True Lord Tianlan's voice suddenly came from behind. Oh yes, what message did Sirius ask you to pass to old man Taihu? Can you say it? Lu Chen hesitated for a moment. At that moment, a thought flashed through his mind. Logically speaking, the content of a request for a message was naturally more confidential under normal circumstances. However, when Sirius told him about it that day, it didn't seem to specifically say that it was to be kept strictly confidential. Apart from that, the damn baldy standing in front of him was obviously not an ordinary person. Therefore, Lu Chen quickly understood the situation. He nodded and said, "It's not a big deal. You can say it." He paused for a moment and said, "Sirius asked me to tell Taihu that it's time to return the leaf that I borrowed from him." True Lord Tianlan raised his eyebrows as if he was a little surprised, as if he did not understand what he said. He said with a hint of astonishment, "Leaf?" But after only a short moment, his face suddenly changed, yet his eyes shone brightly as he suddenly took a step forward and said in a deep voice, "You're saying that the devil cult's legendary one of the 4 divine weapons with 2 leaves and 1 seed is in this immortal city's Sky Dragon Mountain, and is in the hands of that old man Taihu?" As he finished speaking, his expression became stern and solemn. It was as if this matter was unexpectedly important to him. Obviously, Lu Chen did not expect that True Lord Tianlan would have such a big reaction after hearing this. For a moment he was a little stunned and stood rooted to the ground. However, although he looked a little stiff on the surface, in the blink of an eye, his mind was already spinning rapidly like a whirlwind. In an instant he carefully thought through this matter from the beginning to the end. In fact, when he first heard what Sirius told him, Lu Chen had guessed in his heart that the leaf that Sirius mentioned was very likely to be one of the 4 pieces of the divine tree passed down by the devil sect. This was because both Sirius and Taihu's status were too high. Other than the legendary leaf of the divine tree, he could not think of any other leaf in this world that was worthy for them to specially discuss about debt collection. Of course, as for why the leaf of the devil sect would be in the hands of Sirius, and why Taihu, who was the righteous path Zhengxianmeng and the archenemy of the devil sect, would actually borrow this leaf, it was an extremely complicated and confusing matter. There might be a big secret in it. But now, to Lu Chen, all this was temporarily not important. What he had to face was True Lord Tianlan's questioning. Therefore, after a moment of hesitation, Lu Chen decided to tell the truth. He said, "To be honest, I don't know. When Sirius told me, he did not explicitly say that it was the leaf of the divine tree of the devil sect. But I guess it is very possible." He took a glance at perfected Lord Tianlan, and his heart skipped a beat. Then he added, "Actually, it's also because I have this suspicion. Therefore, before I went to look for perfected Lord Tiehu, I thought about it and decided to tell you first to see what you think." True Lord Tianlan stared at Lu Chen. After a while, he slowly nodded with a trace of gratification on his face. Then he looked deeply into the distance. Lu Chen looked over, and found that it was in the direction of the Heavenly Law Hall. After a while he heard True Lord Tianlan said indifferently, "You'd better go over and say the same thing to the old man Taihu. Also, just say that this matter was kept a secret from Sirius and you did not tell me. Let's see how he reacts." After saying that, he slightly narrowed his eyes, but the corners of his mouth curled into a slightly cold smile. Chapter 620. Lu Chen left the main hall of Kunlun, but he didn't rush to the Heavenly Law Hall immediately. Instead, he went to the house where White Lotus was after thinking for a while. From afar, Lu Chen saw the black dog lying at the door. It seemed that it was still doing its duty after a night of waiting. Lu Chen smiled and walked over to pat its head. Of course, Atsu had already woken up. It stood up when it saw Lu Chen and wagged its tail at him. Although there was a huge difference in size between Atsu and Sirius, in Lu Chen's eyes he could see that Atsu already had the temperament and outline of Sirius. When Lu Chen thought that Atsu, which had been by his side all these years, might become a terrifying beast that could summon wind and rain and look down on the world like Sirius, Lu Chen couldn't help but feel that it was unreal. If he thought about it this way, perhaps Atsu would not stay by his side for too long. There were always some spiritual beasts in this world that were born with pride. Perhaps they would linger because of their feelings, but they would never succumb and become slaves. Perhaps it would be time for Atsu to leave when it was strong enough. Lu Chen smiled. Although there was a little regret in his heart, he wasn't sad or disappointed. He stretched out his hand and patted Atsu's neck. He said with a smile, "You've worked hard." Atsu looked up at Lu Chen. It seemed to have sensed Lu Chen's feelings. Its eyes were very gentle, and it even took the initiative to rub its head against Lu Chen's arm. At that moment, their minds seemed to be faintly connected. After a while, Lu Chen patted Atsu's head and stood up straight. He turned his gaze to the door behind Atsu. Yesterday, when he left White Lotus here, he did not take good care of White Lotus's injuries. The condition of the girl's body was too strange. Since Supreme Tianlan was unwilling to help, Lu Chen did not have a good idea. He could only use the power of black fire to try to limit and soothe the violent spiritual power. Needless to say, this risky method actually worked in the end. White Lotus's condition was slightly stabilized, but it was still far from a full recovery. It was just that the inexplicable spiritual power in her body seemed to have weakened, and Lu Chen himself didn't know when White Lotus's condition would worsen again. At the very least, he knew in his heart that there was a huge problem with that girl. Perhaps, if this matter really went according to Supreme Tianlan's plan, it would be better for everyone to ignore it and let White Lotus die in silence. Lu Chen shook his head slightly, pushed the door open and walked in. Behind him, Black Dog looked a little gloomy. It stared at the dark room that Lu Chen walked into. It had one foot in the doorstep, but for some reason, it did not move forward. Just like that, it stood at the door that was neither inside nor outside, as if it was watching or guarding against something. Lu Chen did not notice the strange behavior of Atsu. After he came in, he glanced around the room and soon saw White Lotus lying on the bed. She was covered with a quilt, and her back was facing the wall. It seemed that she had not moved since yesterday. Sure enough, her serious injuries have not recovered? Lu Chen sighed in his heart, and the way he looked at White Lotus was a little complicated. This girl was not close to him, but there were many entanglements between them. With his very tough character, he rarely softened his heart to others, but for some reason he seemed to see White Lotus in a different light. This kind of feeling actually made Lu Chen feel a little strange. For a time, he even wondered if there was something wrong with his brain to like such a young girl. But later, he quickly realized that his feelings for White Lotus were not the kind of love between a man and a woman, but as for what it was, he did not know. Perhaps, he had always lacked too many emotions. He slowly walked over, and sat on the edge of the bed. At the door, Atsu stood on the doorstep, staring at Lu Chen's figure and movements, and seemed to be a little nervous. Lu Chen still did not notice the strange behavior of Atsu. He softly called White Lotus's name, but White Lotus did not move and did not respond. He did not know whether she was asleep or still unconscious. Lu Chen was a little worried, so he reached out his hand to the front of White Lotus's body, and leaned on her white forehead, wanting to see her condition. But at this moment, Atsu suddenly looked up, as if it felt something, and its eyes shone brightly. At the same time, on the delicate and beautiful face of White Lotus, although her eyes were still closed, the corner of her mouth twitched slightly. Then, from the shadow under the quilt, a hand suddenly reached out and grabbed Lu Chen's palm. "Hold it tightly." The room instantly became quiet, and there was no sound. The master of Starry Hall, Lord Guyu, was a relatively low-key person in Zhangxianmeng most of the time. Of course, that was compared to the other 5 spirit-severing perfected lords. Correspondingly, in order to adapt to his temperament, Starry Hall was usually very peaceful and low-key. Not only did they rarely cause trouble, but when they encountered conflicts, especially with powerful halls, unless they were obviously in the right, Starry Hall would usually give in more times, even when the odds were 50-50. This situation, of course, would be noticed and taken advantage of. But no matter what, the strength of Lord Guyu and Starry Hall could not be ignored. So in most cases, everyone would leave some face. Except for Fuyunji. Fuyunji, this hall was arrogant and despotic, and actually had the same temperament as its founder and leader, Lord Tianlan. Especially in these years, Lord Tianlan's prestige was like the sun in the sky. After defeating the last remnants of the devil cult, It reached a state of insufferably arrogant. The entire hall of Fuyunji, in the immortal city, had reached a state where they could do whatever they wanted and despise all other halls. In the eyes of the people of Fuyunji, this great territory of Zhengxianmeng was mostly fought for by Lord Tianlan and Fuyunji. Whether it was the foundation or the prestige, of course, it all belonged to their side. As for the other parasites, they were nothing more than vampires trying to cling on to him. With such a mood, of course, Fuyunji's attitude towards the other halls would not be any better. Of course, no one knew if there was some connivance from the higher-ups of Fuyunji. Not to mention, a few days ago, both Starry Hall and Fuyunji guarded the entrance of the underground city and repaired the underground ruins. But after a small conflict between Lord Tianlan and Lord Guyu, Fuyunji actually chased those people from Starry Hall away. She chased him away without any hesitation. This scene made many people dumbfounded, made many people in Starry Hall angry, and also made many people in Fuyunji secretly feel that it was a little too much. So on this day, when Lord Guyu suddenly appeared at the entrance of the tunnel, the group of guards in Fuyunji all stared with their eyes wide open, at a loss of what to do, and their scalps tingling. This spirit-severing stage lord, could it be that she was here to cause trouble? Under the guesses and worried gazes of the crowd, Lord Guyu walked over expressionlessly, then pointed at the entrance of the tunnel and told the people beside her, "I want to go down and take a look." Chapter 621. The guards at the entrance of the underground city were still led by Lu Ting. Lu Ting himself was also standing in front of the crowd. Looking at the approaching Guyu Lord, his heart was in turmoil. He felt extremely depressed, and even a sense of grievance as though he had nothing left to live for. What kind of luck was this? What kind of world was this? Wasn't he just a guard here? There were countless people like him in the whole of Immortal City and Zhengxianmeng, but why did it seem like he was the unluckiest? The person walking over was not an ordinary person, but an unreachable demigod perfected lord. Even though this perfected lord and his starry hall were relatively low-key, he was still an existence that cultivators like Lu Ting could only look up to. To put it bluntly, if he angered this Guyu perfected lord, she could just find an excuse to kill him with one slap. It would be difficult for Fuyunji to avenge Lu Ting. What could they do to a demigod perfected lord? To deal with a demigod perfected lord, the whole of Fuyunji would have to go all out, or they could directly get rid of someone like perfected Lord Tianlan. Only then would they be able to seek justice for a small fry like Lu Ting. But was it worth it to do so? Even though everyone in the world said that all living things were equal, but in this Middle Earth, there were still differences in the lives of people. Of course, those who could reach the level of a soul formation perfected lord were all peerless talents. Not only did they have extremely high cultivation levels, but they also had their own poise when interacting with others. Normally, they wouldn't hold a grudge against insignificant figures. But what if? Lu Ting didn't want to become that if at all. He hoped that there wouldn't be any accidents at all. He loved being alive, and there were still many things he wanted to enjoy. He just had a chance to get acquainted with young Master Lu Chun, who had a bright future ahead of him. He didn't want to die at all. Lu Ting sighed in his heart. If only I could just ignore everything and run away. Lu Ting sighed. But Fuyunji had always had strict rules. Since they were stationed here, they naturally had the responsibility of guarding. Lu Ting was the leader of the guards, so he was even more duty-bound. If he slipped away, the person who wanted to kill him would be Fuyunji. In comparison, Lu Ting didn't want to go against the Fuyunji that he was in at all. He wouldn't even dare to. Thus, he braced himself and tried to put on a warm and respectful smile. He bowed to the Guyu perfected lord and said, "Greetings, my lord. I am Lu Ting, a guard from Fuyunji." True monarch Guyu stopped and looked at Lu Ting, who was blocking her way. Lu Ting immediately felt a chill run down his spine. In that instant, he even had the illusion that the wind had suddenly become shrill, as if a huge palm was about to slap him into meat paste in the next moment. Fortunately, after calming himself down, the surroundings seemed to be as calm as before. Lu Ting sneaked a glance at his surroundings and discovered that Guyu Supreme's expression was calm and composed, without any signs of anger. However, The floating clouds division guards behind him had all silently retreated a few steps back, causing Lu Ting to stand out in front of Guyu Supreme all of a sudden, making him stand out in front of Guyu Supreme. These bastards! Lu Ting was furious. He secretly swore that if he could survive today, he would go back and teach these unreliable subordinates a lesson. He would torture them until they were half dead to vent his anger. But now was not the time to vent his anger. There was still a terrifying demigod-perfected lord standing in front of him. Lu Ting revealed a smile that was uglier than crying. He laughed dryly and said, "My lord, this place is guarded by Fuyunji. Our sect's hall leader Shui personally told us that unless it is true monarch Tianlan or herself, no one is allowed to enter the underground cave." True monarch Guyu frowned and looked at Lu Ting. As if a bucket of cold water had been poured over his head, Lu Ting felt as if his body had fallen into an ice cellar. Even his voice was slightly trembling. At this time, Lu Ting did not know if it was the strict rules of Fuyunji that were suppressing him, or if he was too afraid and forgot to escape. Could it be that he was really so unlucky that he would die here today? Just as Lu Ting was letting his imagination run wild, he suddenly heard Guyu perfected monarch say with an indifferent expression, "I've gone down several times with your perfected monarch Tianlan, including a while ago when our two halls were stationed here together. Why, now you won't even let me go?" Lu Ting was first shocked, then happy. He was shocked that this true monarch seemed to be determined to go down to the underground cave. Then he was overjoyed that true monarch Guyu seemed to be in a good mood, and was actually willing to be reasonable. It was good that she was willing to be reasonable. Lu Ting's spirit was lifted and his expression became even more respectful. He bowed towards true monarch Guyu and tried his best to show his obedience and respect. Then he said softly, "Reporting to my lord, this is indeed not because I have the guts to make things difficult for you, but because it is the rules set by the higher-ups. You see, with your status, it shouldn't be difficult for you to know the rules of our Fuyunji. Although I absolutely do not dare to stop you, but if you just walk in like this, then I will probably be thrown into Fuyunji's prison, and have my tendons pulled out and my skin skinned." True monarch Guyu frowned and did not speak, but was obviously hesitant. It seemed that this true monarch was indeed a kind person. Even though their statuses were like heaven and earth, he was still unwilling to make things difficult for a small fry. Lu Ting was extremely grateful for this, and had a very good impression of true monarch Guyu. He almost knelt down and kowtowed. After a while, true monarch Guyu nodded and said, "I understand your concerns and the fact that you have no choice but to do this, but I do have an important matter to attend to. How about this? Send someone to the Kunlun temple to pass a message, and tell Tianlan that I am here. As for whether to let me in or not, just ask him to give me a clear answer. But don't blame me for not reminding you. I won't wait forever. I will give you at most an hour." After saying that, he walked to the side and stood with his hands behind his back, as if he really was waiting. Seeing this scene, Lu Ting was so touched that tears almost flowed down his cheeks. He hurriedly thanked him, then turned around and rushed back to the crowd. He did not even have the time to get angry at his subordinates who did not have the spirit of loyalty. First, he snatched the best chair and carefully placed it beside true monarch Guyu. Then, he came back to inform the crowd, turned around and ran towards the Kunlun temple on Mount Tianlang. True monarch Tianlan only found out about what happened at the foot of the mountain after a little longer than the time it took to drink a cup of tea. His face was very calm, but his eyes flickered a few times, as if he was thinking about something. This was the first time Lu Ting, who was kneeling in the middle of the hall, stepped into this place that was the highest place for people in the Fuyunji system. He did not dare to look around. After a while, he suddenly heard an angry rebuke from above. "How dare you, Guyu? Are you trying to provoke me?" A gust of wind blew and the tall and burly figure had already reached the entrance of the hall. Lu Ting stood up in shock and heard true monarch Tianlan's cold voice. "Follow me to meet this arrogant old man." You're tuning in to the Echoes of the Heart YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.